Hi, welcome to the channel. In today's video we're looking at the differences between the OEX PHOXX 1 original version and the OEX PHOXX 1 V2. Now, I couldn't find much differences between the two tents when I researched them online, so I ended up buying both tents to give it a real proper comparison, and I'm actually really surprised by just how many tweaks I've made to the V2 version and just how superior it is to the original version. So I'm going to take you from the tents in terms of pack sizing, pitching, interior space, and all the subtle tweaks between the two tents. So let's get on with it. In terms of weight, I weighed them both on my kitchen scales, 1,563 grams, 1,630 grams. So the PHOXX 1 V2 is slightly heavier. Maybe that's reflecting the fact that it's a slightly bigger tent, just a fraction bigger than the original version. Pack size is pretty similar. This one I've been out and taken out for a wild camp and used. This one is brand new in the pack, so maybe the pack size is slightly smaller because it's packed away neat from the factory. But there isn't really much difference in terms of weight or pack size. One of the most noticeable differences between the two tents is the ground sheet. So on the original PHOXX 1, the ground sheet is that kind of really plasticky, like you get on a cheap tarpaulin. So it's thick, it's heavy, it's kind of crunchy, doesn't fold down or pat down that well. Whereas on the V2, it's a much more modern, packable, flexible material. So in terms of durability, the jury's out on that, and just have to wait and see or look at other reviews where people have used them a lot. But certainly look and feel of the V2 is that it's a much better quality item because it's lost that really awful kind of tarpaulin ground sheet. You can really see there's a huge difference there. So yeah, V2, in my opinion, much better for that. The material differences continue in terms of the peg and pole bag. So again, nice new material on the V2 and that kind of awful tarpaulin material on the original version. The V2 has aluminium pegs with a little spiky bottom and a nice hook on the top. The original version has these really awful steel pegs, so not even spiked at the top to get into tough ground. They bend easily, they're really heavy, and they're not really hooked very well either. So yep, V2, far superior pegs. I mean, obviously you might want to upgrade the pegs anyway, but I would definitely upgrade these. I would say for most conditions, these are fine as they are. In terms of tent poles, they seem to be identical. So you've got OEX 7mm Endura poles for both of them. So a small pole for the rear, a taller, bigger pole for the front to get a bit of height. But apart from colour, these do appear to be identical as far as I can see. That's the inners pitch. Immediately you can see some pretty big differences. And actually pitching the two side by side, I've realised there's a lot more differences than I suspected in terms of just the quality and the finish and the feel of them. The V2, you can see it really has been upgraded in really subtle but important ways. So we'll go through the details now because there's a lot of little details to show you which is quite significantly different on the two tents. But overall, yeah, ground sheet, hugely different, much better quality on the V2. You can see with the original PHOXX 1, it's almost entirely mesh, so two big mesh sides, a little thin strip of solid material across the top, whereas the V2 still got the big mesh panel at the front, still got a little mesh panel at the back for airflow, but mostly solid. So in terms of a bad weather, sort of winter type tent, this is going to be much better bet because there's a lot more solid material. Interestingly enough, there's loads of mesh on this tent, but there's no mesh at the bottom to let air flow through. There is on the V2, so there's a slight difference there. But let's get into the details because the details really do set these two tents apart even further. First difference is the design at the bottom. So you see this is the PHOXX 1 V2. It's got a little air vent for airflow and it's got two peg out points. So there's a much wider bottom there with two peg out points. The original PHOXX 1, you can see it's only got one peg out point, so it goes to a very narrow point and doesn't have such a wide foot box. So the length is much more usable in the V2 because you've got the wider foot box, whereas here you've still got, you know, a lot of length there, but it seems a bit pointless if it's not usable because it goes to such a sharp point. Difference number two is the zips. This is the V2 and the zips are YKK. On the original PHOXX 1, the zips are unbranded. Difference number three, the V2 PHOXX has a continuous zip. that zips around the corner. The original Fox one has two separate zips which meet at the corner, and what that means is you do have a little bit of a gap there where bugs can get in. On the storage door, you can see there, from the way I've got it pitched, there's a little bit of a gap there, and creepy crawlies will get through there. And the storage door of the V2, again, a nice curved zip. Another difference is the Fox original version does not have any kind of hanging point for a lamp. The Fox V2 has a nice little hanging hook above where you sleep for you to put a little lamp up. Another noticeable difference is where the poles go in. So on the Fox 1 original version, they go into this material out with a big clip for the outer to go onto, and that sort of continues one big piece of material for the peg and out point. On the Fox 1 V2, this is exactly the same peg and out point on the V2, and you can see a much narrower band of material goes down to an aluminium hoop to put the pole into. A separate piece of material has a much smaller clip for the outer to clip onto, and then again a much lighter, smaller little place to hook the peg onto. So that little detail makes a big difference on each pole point. It just feels a bit classy, it just feels a bit better made, a bit better attention to detail. A subtle difference is that on the Fox 1 original version, there's no indication as to which pole goes into which hole. Not particularly important because one pole is significantly shorter or longer than the other. But nonetheless, on the Fox 1 V2, they are colour coded. You can see there's a gold mark on each side of the front and a silver mark on each side of the bottom. And on the bottom poles, there are two silver things so you know which one is which. Definitely quite a few differences just looking at the inners and how they're pitched, the little features and stuff. It definitely feels like the V2 is an improved version. They've looked at a few things, they've tweaked it, they've got YKK zips on there, they've got rid of the two zips in favour of one that swerves right round. Much better for bug protection. They've obviously chosen to go with a more solid material rather than the mesh. So again, if you were thinking about a tent and you wanted a lot more airflow, a lot more mesh, then the original version is the one to go for. If you wanted it a bit warmer, still got good airflow as far as I can see because you've got the proper rear vent and the front vent, but you want a bit more warmth, a bit more protection, then the V2 does offer a lot more of that. So let's get the outers pitched and see if there's any real differences there. That's the outsides pitched. Now there are a couple of subtle differences, but you can see overall the design is the same. Outer goes over, it attaches each pole on either side from a little tie point, so you tie it onto the pole at the rear and the front, same for version 2 and version 1. There are two guide out points at the back and two at the front. They're the same. There's just a couple of little subtle differences which we'll go through, and then what we'll do is we'll get inside the tents just to look at livable space. I will put on screen the specs of the tent because this tent is a fraction longer, a fraction taller and about the same width. This tent obviously shorter, slightly lower, and according to the stats, 1 centimetre wider. But obviously, as you can see when we pitch the inners, this bottom goes to a point, whereas that bottom goes to a square edge. So you are gaining space there. So even the width has changed on the stats, the actual real width on the inner is going to be much bigger with V2. So I'm going to get in each tent and just sort of show you how livable the space is. And so you get more of a realistic idea of what a 5'11" person looks like in each tent and how it kind of feels internally. Because again, the subtle changes between the tents, people think, oh, they're roughly the same, just difference of the inner design in terms of mesh. But I think what we're seeing now is there's really quite a few changes on the V2 that make it a more livable little tent. One of the subtle changes is that you can see there centrally there is a peg out point from the inner, and then the outer requires 2 additional pegs to make sure it's secured. So that is the V1. On the V2, because there's 2 pegging out points on the inner, because it doesn't go to a point, the outer goes onto the same pegs. So you're actually saving 2 pegs worth of weight there, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when they're those really heavy steel ones, it does make a bit of a difference. And the actual kind of rear box end of the tent just seems more secure on the V2 than it does on the V1. I think because of the design and the way it's all attached together, it just seems a bit more secure. The other noticeable difference is the guy lines. So probably the same material, but the Fox 1 original has got a plastic slider, and the Fox 1 V2, different colour guy line, but it's got this really nice aluminium O-ring slider. So again, subtle, but just feels like better quality, just feels like you're getting more for your money. Another difference, now I've pictured them both side by side, is the quality of the material. On the original version, it doesn't look like there's any kind of grid pattern or ripstop on it. There may well be, but it just doesn't have that feel that there is. Whereas on the V2 version, you can really see the clear honeycomb pattern on the material. So that is usually an indication of a decent ripstop. So again, I'm not 100% sure if the original version is ripstop or not, but there's definitely a change in the material design on V2, and it's probably for the better, because this is the kind of thing you get on all the Vango tents or other tents. Uses kind of polyester material. This is the original Fox 1, and straight away there is noticeably less space in this tent. So my feet are kind of touching the roof of the bottom because my feet are like that currently. There's very little room, goes into that triangle point, so there's space down there that's just not usable, and the height just seems lower on the original Fox 1, so my feet aren't comfortable. And the reason I'm having to put them that low is there's a lot less sort of length at this end. So the very top of the tent is about like half an arm's length from where my head is. So my head and where I'm breathing is actually on the solid material, and the mesh is in front of my head. And so where you're going to sit up naturally, you're brushing against the top of the tent. It is, yeah, it's very short, this tent. There's a noticeable difference inside space-wise. So the original version definitely for shorter people is absolutely fine. I'm 5'11", and I find it a little bit restrictive, if I'm honest. I have slept in this tent before on an absolutely stunning wild camp in the Banner Brecanyog. Got on with it absolutely fine, but having just been in the V2, yeah, this feels much smaller internally. Straight away in the V2, the space is just, it feels substantially bigger. It might just be psychological, but no, there's definitely more space. So the foot box is definitely taller because I'm lying in exactly the same position with my feet up like that. On the V2, they've got enough height to do that. So my feet are nicely towards the bottom. Because the foot box squares off rather than going to a point, it's higher, it's longer that way. And what that means is my head now is directly below the main aluminium pole. So the lamp's above me, the mesh is above my head, so for breathability and lack of condensation, that's all going to be, you know, as the tent is designed. Again, I'm 5'11", I've literally just got out of the original version tent and got into the V2, and I do feel a big difference here. So I've got my arms completely outstretched and I'm just touching the top of the V2 tent, whereas in the other tent I had about half an arm's length in which to do that. So just a far more comfortable experience in this tent, just far more comfortable. I feel like it's got a bit more, I think the width is roughly the same, but because you're able to go further down, you appreciate the width and the height more. So if I'm up like this, in the previous tent, your head is bashing against that. In this tent, you're able to sort of rest in this position and your head is at the highest point. That makes a huge difference. Obviously, that means if you're the same height as me or shorter. If you are taller, you've got a chance with the V2. In the V1, the original one, no, if you're a tall person, absolutely no good view. The subtle changes OEX have made to the V2 make it a nicer tent. You know, they make it nicer to pitch, they make it nicer to sort of look around. You know, you can't fault that. but that doesn't really make it necessarily a much better purchase than the original tent. But the tweaks that they've made to the interior space, in my opinion, just transform the tent in terms of livability. It just feels a much more pleasant place to be with that extra width at the bottom, tiny bit of height at the bottom, extra bit of height at the top, and because it's longer, you get to enjoy the height rather than actually your head's crammed at the low end at the top anyway. There's no point in having this kind of high bar. Just, yeah, this is a much more livable tent. So I think the only reason you might want to go for the original version is if you really want the sort of mesh interior. Apart from that, there's absolutely nothing to recommend the original tent over the V2 version. The final difference between the two tents is how easy they are to pack away. The V2, piece of cake to get back into the original bag, the same length for the poles, so you've got plenty of room at the top to cinch it over and make it waterproof. The original Fox one, much more difficult to get back into the bag of the right length, so you can't really cinch the top up because you can't really get it short enough, so you need to actually undo that again and give it another go. It's just because the ground sheet is just, like I said, that really old tarp-like material. It just doesn't pack down as small, and it just doesn't pack down as well. This is just much, much better. So again, another victory for the V2. Well, there we have it. Hopefully, an in-depth comparison between the OEX PHOXX original version and the OEX PHOXX V2. I hope to have covered all of the differences between the two tents. It makes it really easy to notice those differences when you're literally pitching them side by side. You get to sort of feel the differences, the little subtle tweaks and changes made to V2. But I was surprised at just how much better the V2 felt to be in than the V1. The slight tweaks to the height on the V2 and the footbox end just, for me, transform it. In the V2, your head is around here, for me anyway, at 5'11", so you're enjoying all of that height, shoulder width, and you've got all this space at the top end then internally for storage, and obviously you've got the external storage as well. In the original version, obviously I'm 5'11", as I keep banging on about, my head's about here, so you're not enjoying that height, you're not enjoying the shoulder width here, and you're not enjoying loads of space at the top. So V2 all day long for me. The only reason I'd even consider one of the original versions is maybe the EV version, the Evolution version, which is a really light green. That has better inner materials. I think it's the same size, but it's much, much lighter. So it's gonna be lighter than this and lighter than this. So the only real reason you'd ever want to go for the original version is if you really like a much more mesh interior, or you're fairly short anyway, so that kind of additional space isn't really gonna make any difference for you. If you can find that much cheaper, then yeah, it's still a really good little tent. I have wild camped in it, had a reasonably comfortable night, but I would much, much, much prefer being inside the V2. The extra little bit of space just makes, for me, a huge difference. If you do feel I've missed anything, ask any questions you want in the comments. I'll do my utmost to get back to you with a decent answer. I do respond to all comments anyway, so I'll definitely let you know one way or the other if I do or don't know the answer. If you've enjoyed the video, if you found it really useful, do drop me a like. Obviously this kind of video takes me quite a long time to make and I've had to go out and buy both the tents to do it. I originally, when I looked for this tent, I found one. I couldn't really find much detail specifically on the original version, let alone what really the differences were between the two. So if it has been useful, then do drop the video a like. If this kind of stuff is something that you're interested in, do please subscribe to the channel, because I know every YouTuber says that, but it does make me smile in the mornings if I wake up and I've got 1 or 2 more subscribers. It makes a huge difference to my mental well-being, so please do. Anyway, that is it for the video. There's absolutely nothing more I can think of to say about the two tents. The only thing to say about them is whichever one you are looking at buying, if you can get them for the £30 or £40 mark, I think you're getting a really solid tent, whether you go for the original version or for the V2, and you'll enjoy wild camping in them, albeit just be aware of their restricted space and stuff. You've got to like low slung tents, but you are going to be able to sit out a storm in these quite comfortably. Anyway, huge thanks for watching. You made it this far, and I'll catch you in the next one.